Welcome to the SSI Orbit podcast, a forum for conversations that explore the ever-growing ecosystems of self-sovereign identity. And I'm your host, Mathieu Glaude. So what use cases should a national digital ID program prioritize in collaboration with the private sector? And as these use cases become verticals of their own, then what are some of the horizontal considerations that need to be applied to enable all of the use cases to function within their relative ecosystem? To answer these questions, I sit down with Hakan Yildiz. Hakan is a research associate at TU Berlin and is also a consortium partner at IDunion. He's a seasoned product manager with experience in every product lifecycle for B2B and B2C products. He's also a subject matter expert in blockchain, distributed ledger technology, and self-sovereign ID. So Hakan is very well positioned to talk about IDunion, this new, bold self-sovereign ID strategy that's coming out of Germany and spreading a little bit throughout Europe. So we start the conversation off today by just giving a bit of an overview on IDunion, talking about some of the early credentials that are being issued by the German government for both people and legal entities. And we talk a bit about the existing ecosystem. We then move on into talking about the use cases, these vertical things as I had called them. Government use cases such as e-health, e-gov, and education, and also private sector use cases in the financial sector and hospitality industry. We then get into IDunion's horizontal work streams and talk about how things such as governance, cybersecurity, wallet security, user experience, and interoperability are managed. Now, without any further ado, here's the very informative conversation about IDunion with Hakan Yildiz. Enjoy. For those who aren't aware of IDunion, what is IDunion?
So IDunion is basically a project whose core goal is to actually create a decentralized identity network for issuing digital credentials in SSI format, self-sovereign identity format called verifiable credentials, to normal persons like us, to legal entities, and to IoT things, so to speak, Internet of Things. And like I said, the core is a decentralized identity network. And based on building on top of this network, there are a bunch of use cases coming from many of our consortial partners and associated partners that is going to be used to utilize this identity network that is being right now built in Germany.
Is it solely in Germany? Are you seeing other involvement? I know we're seeing more announcements of at least collaboration cross-border. What's happening there? Good
catch. It's not only Germany. You're right. It's a German Forschungsprojekt. So it's a research project exactly coming from German Economic Ministry. That's why I said Germany, but you're right. We're actually open for the whole European Union at this point. And we do also have some cooperation with partners outside the EU as well, like Switzerland is one of them.
What are some of the initial things that, at least taking it from the perspective of the government, if the government's funding this and trying to kickstart a bunch of these ecosystems, is the government trying to play the role of an issuer to begin with? And if so, kind of what are they looking to issue? You did mention legal entities, people, IoT. So what are kind of some of these first verifiable credentials that are coming from the German government?
So the German government itself has its own organs. One of them is, for example, an issuance organs or kind of a digital security and issuance organ called Bundesdruckerei, which is responsible for example, creating the physical German IDs or passports, but as well as doing the same thing in a digital environment with electronic identification, basically. And through Bundesdruckerei, for example, what is happening is that there are identifications that are being rolled out based on the verifiable credentials called Basic ID. Basic ID, the name itself comes from the fact that this is the basic ID that will be used to issue other credentials. So for example, once you have a basic ID in verifiable credential format, you can use that basic ID to first of all log into your e-government use cases, but as well as get some other identification, for example, a driver's license or a student card or opening a bank account, for example. So that will be basically the igniting credential and taken as the source of point of reference.
I think a lot of countries, or a lot of even just sub-jurisdictions in countries, are on different levels of maturity already with their ID digitization process. So, for example, just looking in my own country here in Canada, we have different provinces, and some provinces have made more advances in the digitization of IDs. Some haven't, but as they're all looking to move towards issuing verifiable credentials, the process that they take to, I guess, ID proof citizens, or get the levels of assurance on an identity high enough to issue credentials is kind of an important consideration. And with people wanting to do this more digitally and not necessarily show up in person to get an ID issued to them, which is what happens today. If I want a driver's license, or if I want a health card, a lot of the times I need to go and be identified and authenticated in person. What is the current landscape before jumping to the basic IDs in Germany? Is there already some digitization? And how do you think about the whole idea of kind of creating a level ground of ID proofing to have enough assurance to issue these basic IDs?
So first of all, like from a legal point of view, or in the legal ground, any digital credential is actually not a substitute to the physical credentials, legal credentials, but is a complement. Meaning you still need to have your physical ID card or your driver's license when you, once they're, for example, expired, you still need to go to the registry offices to renew them, basically. However, once this is in your physical domain, so to speak, there are some options. Like in Germany right now, there are options to utilize this physical credential and use it in a digital way with a application called Ausweis App 2. It's called. It's the second version of the ID application, basically. Coming from German Bundestürkei, if I remember correctly. And there, what happens is basically they combine a couple of things like who you are and what you know, like two-factor authentication, basically, to create a digital identification that you can use to access certain services, basically. Especially using, for example, IDAS login. This is electronic identification login for the EU. And using the app in combination with a NFC capable smartphone, which is also not rooted. So basically a unrooted Android or a non-jailbroken iPhone, which supports NFC. We are at this stage capable of creating these digital identifications, so to speak.
Understood. So there's no need, I guess, to perform the classic OCR of a physical license and a liveness test. Does this not fall into the process because there's enough assurance through the existing NFC process? Is that correct?
Yeah. So the application itself is being blessed, so to speak, or like certified by the German security agency called BSI, which is for internet security related topics, including like encryptions and cryptography. So there is a certain level of trust on the application that is being utilized. There is a trust on the process that is being utilized, and that's why you get a certain level of assurance, so to speak, when you are utilizing all these information. And this is all regarding to so level of assurance. You mentioned it a couple of times. In Europe, we do have a regulation called IDAS, Electronic Identification Regulations in Europe, which also is for digital signatures. However, in there, for example, there are 3 levels of assurances, and one of them is low, the next one is substantial, and the highest one is high. And depending on the use case or the requirements of the verifier, you can actually, you don't have to always go for the highest level of assurance to access certain goods and services, so to speak. But using this Ausweis app when the NFC card, so you reach this level of assurance according to the current regulations.
You mentioned at the start here, so we've kind of been talking a little bit about identities as they pertain to people, when they pertain to legal entities. Is the government body that is responsible for managing the corporate registries, do they become the direct issuers? I think there's been a lot of hype, but which is good hype, around kind of legal entity verifiable credentials, and you have organizations like Glyph that are helping
exactly
push these globally. And I think this is quite an important piece when you're thinking about deploying a decentralized infrastructure. Onboarding legal entities or people to a decentralized infrastructure is quite different than onboarding via a federated infrastructure, let's say. So you really want to make sure that you have these credentials in place when someone comes in, right? So it's not just anyone saying anything about themselves or about their business. And so when we talk about the legal entity identifiers, who is issuing that, and how does it compare or contrast to stuff that's happening in Glyph?
Yeah, so Glyph, first of all, Glyph is also a partner at IDunion. So we are working closely together to implement certain use cases. And the basic idea of company credentials did not come from the governmental side, from public sector, but actually from the private sector. So Bosch and Siemens, two of our partners, came up with a use case about company identification cards, so to speak, or like a virtual card. Before you even start doing business with the company. This is due to the fact that when they are selling some wares, for example, if the company is actually making a fraud and not giving their right address, or not saying that when they are not the company that they say they are, there comes the fraud part of the risk into the equation, so to speak, because then you deliver the ware without getting paid, so to speak, right? And to mitigate this kind of issues, as well as improve the existing processes that they are already there, verifiable credential-based company identification cards came up as a use case from the industry, so to speak, from the two of the bigger German auto industry companies, so to speak. And Glyph is also now working on that use case as well. And the main goal is basically to identify and automatize the process of company onboarding and purchase processes.
And so you mentioned a couple companies from the private sector, being Bosch and Siemens. What is the role of the private sector within the IDunion consortium, and how did the collaboration between the public sector that is behind this initiative kind of meet with the objectives, I guess, of the private sector? How did this collaboration start, and what are kind of the differences in the roles that both companies like Bosch and Siemens play versus the government agencies that are involved here?
Yeah, so I think this is going to be more my personal idea of what it is, because if you would ask another partner at IDunion, they might have a different answer to this. But from my point of view and from my interpretation, I see government as more of a legal enabler, and from the regulatory side of the things, and also enabler in terms of acceptance of the technology itself, whereas the private sector is the one which is actually building the whole infrastructure, so to speak. And I am working, for example, at Technical University Berlin. I'm at the public sector, and what we do is basically being the research partner of the consortium, meaning that we are looking at certain feasibilities that might become problematic for the productive environment, so to speak, or we're looking at the interoperability between other SSI ecosystems, as well as existing identity access management solutions, to make sure that we have in that area, good acceptance, so to speak, from the technical point of view. And what, for example, private sector is also doing like very thoroughly is the user experience and user interface design part of the things, to make sure that when a user comes in and starts using a wallet and gets credentials issued to use those credentials, this user flow, user journey is being tested and designed in a very careful manner by private sector. But also the majority of the use cases are also coming from the private sector due to the fact that most people are using their official credentials for e-government businesses, maybe once a month, maybe tops once a week, but it's not something that people use a lot of times. And this is the part where we think that, or I think that the role of the private sector is very an important one, due to the fact that banking is going to be something that people use on a daily basis, or buying a ticket is something that people do on a daily basis, or enrolling. Okay, so some student cases like getting your transcripts out can be a more used use case, so to speak. And since we are opting for a very broad spectrum of use cases covering like 7 different domains and clusters with 45 use cases, we believe that the adoption or the use of this technology is going to be much more spread easier than if it was only based on public sector use cases, so to speak, or e-government use cases, which are also there. It's just private sector is adding like an additional layer of use cases and the frequency of usage, so to speak.
That makes total sense. So just looking at some of the use cases that are driven in the public sector, if it's e-gov, it's education, if it's e-health, I totally see that these are very important use cases, but the amount of volume is going to be much higher in some other sectors in the private sector. If you're talking about the financial sector or e-commerce or any other type of industry or access management, these types of things. So what are, and I think a lot of people that are forming their digital ID strategies tend to see the financial sector as one of the initial benefactors from government issued IDs. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of processes that need to be followed by the financial sector that are regulatory processes that require certain forms of verification of personal and legal entity ID as well. We started jumping into use cases a little bit here, but what are some of the interesting use cases that you're seeing in the private sector use cases? And it could be financial, it could be IAM. You mentioned there's 45 use cases that are happening. So do you mind giving a little bit of an overview of some of the interesting, promising use cases that are happening from private sector collaboration?
Yeah, absolutely. So like you mentioned, banking is one of the sectors that benefit from use of more secure identities or tamper-proof identities more, because of the fact that there is more to lose, right? Like they are verifying credentials or digital identities, and they're offering their services, which is related to money. So there's a high risk that in case of fraud, money is being lost. Besides from that point that the banks are benefiting from secure digital identities quite a lot. Our bank partners are working on one use case, which maybe it's not that interesting to the end user, but I think it is a very cost-saving countermeasure, which is going to be shown or directed to the end user in the end of the day, is reusable KYC data, for example, right? So when you are creating a bank account in Europe or in Germany as well, you have to go through a KYC process, know your customer process. So the regulation says that the bank needs to know their customer and needs to know who they are before they offer their services. And when you open a bank account, you have to go through this like either on a physical interview like environment, and you show your ID and you talk about you prove that you say who you are, or you have to do it like on a digital way, like ID Now is offering some services like that, which costs a lot of money because it's no, I would say not manual labor, but like human involved labor, so to speak. And yeah, it comes with a high amount of costs for the banks. And one of the use cases is basically once this KYC data has been created for one bank, that this is actually stored with the user themselves, so that they can be used again if the user goes for another bank account. Meaning that the other bank doesn't have to pay for the same KYC regulation countermeasures and go through the whole physical or digital identification process with a with another human being on the other hand controlling the person. I think that's a very interesting use case also because of the fact that like your KYC data is about you and it should be like, kind of like in your control. So from that point of view, it's also kind of nice. But on the other hand, like I said, it saves a lot of additional costs to the banks, which will improve the services or benefit the customers once it's like reduced, so to speak. But we have many other use cases coming from the private sector. One of them is, for example, a smart checkout process where a customer can check out and once the payment functionality has been offered, you can pay with, for example, your bank account, like via bank, make a bank transfer. But since the bank transfers take a lot of time, you can actually get from your bank that you have paid this company a certain amount. And as a credential, this has been given to you, which you can show to the service provider, so to speak, so that the process of purchase process has been fastened, like it's increased speed, like it does with PayPal, for example, or a credit card. Another. Should I say a couple of more, or I don't know?
Yeah, sure. You could give a couple more of them, and I will have some specific. I have some thoughts or some questions to dive a little deeper into individual ones. But if you could just quickly give a couple other ones to give an idea of what's been prioritized.
Okay, of course. So another one is, for example, the hotel check-in use case that is actually came from the German Chancellor's Office project, and it has been transferred to IDunion project to continue working on, where you can actually check in as a guest to a hotel when you are having a travel initiated by a company, for example. So this is one of the use cases. It maybe might not sound is for everybody, but like since there's a lot of people who are working in industry in Germany and business trips are quite usual, it actually has a lot of frequent uses, so to speak, if once it gets implemented. And that's why it's also kind of an interesting use case. Another one that we're working on is SSI-based student tickets for public transportation, where a high school student, for example, get their student tickets for traveling with public transport in Berlin and Brandenburg using verifiable credentials, student ID. And a similar thing that we are planning to roll on is using the same thing, but with university student ID, so to speak.
When we look at each one of these use cases, I guess there's an assumption that there's a very different ecosystem for each one of them, because there's going to be different issuers for a financial use case versus an education use case. The holders could be the same. The verifiers are going to be very different, and it pertains to the use case as well. Do each one of these kind of, and we're looking at them, I guess, a little more as like verticals that are happening within IDunion. So do each of these vertical use cases, because they have their own ecosystems and own entities that are interacting with it, are they all working on their own trust frameworks? Or are they all working, because I'm assuming there needs to be governance for each one of these, right? Do you mind giving a little bit of an overview of how each one of these verticals is being structured from just a perspective of managing an ecosystem. So if I'm presenting a reusable KYC credential, I need to make sure that this KYC credential had been issued from a legitimate bank, right? So how does this governance kind of function within each one of these verticals?
The common denominator for all these use cases and different clusters that were mentioned before is the decentralized identity network that is being built based on the Hyperledger Aries and Indy technology stack, meaning the ecosystem itself is the same. So we're using the same identity network to issue credentials, to verify credentials, and it doesn't matter if it's coming from a university credential or a KYC data credential or company identification information, so to speak. However, there are some cases where a trust scheme needs to be built, for example, in KYC data. For that purpose, there is a different work stream that we work on to create that kind of processes and possibilities, so to speak. But which is not relevant for every single use case. For example, I mean, if you're talking about a student ID, the only thing that I need is the basis ID to create it. But if you're talking about KYC data, it also starts to become an sensitive topic, so to speak, to see how the data should look like, and based on that, a schema, the trust schema is being defined, so to speak. So this is like what kind of schemas are being defined is one thing. This has been done by the banks, for example, for KYC data. This has been done by universities, for example, or other public sector entities for issued credentials. And there is a certain amount of cooperation that is happening outside the consortium itself as well. So I cannot speak much about what's going on in the KYC area because I'm not a part of the work stream. However, when we're talking, for example, creating a schema for bachelor's degree, for example, we are looking at international corporations and working groups, and we're participating in them actively. One of them being the W3C Educational Credentials Working Group. Another one is participation in the EPSI Early Adapters Wave, and also using already existing frameworks, for example, Europass Digital Learners credential, so to speak. And based on these informations, if we don't already have a schema that has been defined in any other format, maybe, for example, XML, it's also possible that some use cases are already just implementing something that already exists in XML format and not in verifiable credential or SSI scheme, but in a different way. So this is only a matter of translation, but there are also some areas where they really need to define these credentials, so to speak. But I would say this is happening in different working groups, and I don't know the overview of it by heart, but we're participating in more than 50 different working groups as IDunion Consortium. That is quite a number. And for the initial trust issue that you actually mentioned, meaning that why can for example, university, or how can this decentralized identifier is allowed to issue a bachelor's degree, for example, in a given credential format. So for this, we are actually working close together with the European Self-Sovereign Identity Foundation, which is thriving or planning to work as a global registry for European universities and schools, for example, where a decentralized identifier from universities, for example, registered. And in the future, what we're planning to do is to connect these decentralized identifiers by chaining them between each other, like meaning creating a decentralized identifier in the Indy network, in IDunion network, for example, which is connected to the European Self-Sovereign Identity Foundation that we also have, to create that initial trust, meaning when this credential is issued, the question is not only, okay, why should I trust this DID, which is in the IDunion? The answer would be, because it's connected to the European Self-Sovereign Identity Foundation, so ledger, and creating a trust that way, basically building the trust. Yeah, and for the schema definitions, there are two ways. Well, one of them is, of course, that we lie the schema definitions in the Hyperledger Indie network. But in the future, when we move towards different technology stacks, like, for example, JSON linked data documents, and linked data proofs, like BBS Plus signatures, that is going to be less of a problem because of the fact that you can actually have a one schema defined, which is being used by the whole Europe, for example. That would be no problem in that case.
Is the way that government looks at ID different than the way private sector looks at ID? And I'll just give a couple of examples here. I think you did mention, and we are talking about for private sector use cases, there's a lot more transaction volume. You may be able to store receipts. You may be able to store all sorts of other things in your wallet. Whereas for public sector use cases, it's mainly just identification, or maybe there's more than that.
Taxation.
And I guess this is more of maybe more of a question, like personal opinion I'm looking for. But how do you look at ID, or how does everyone look at ID? Because I think it could be extended to a lot of different things, right? It's not only about having a wallet with my driver's license, and as these decentralized ecosystems keep growing, whatever is your ID may keep evolving. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I was thinking about it just right now as you were asking me the question, like how governments or like a public sector sees identification different than corporations. I would say governments actually see identification as a mean to know who their subjects are, or who their citizens are, so to speak, to exactly know their registrations, as well as for different purposes, like, for example, in that case, also taxation, right? Whereas companies, but when I'm saying it, I start to think differently because of Google, for example. For companies, identity is important to, for one reason, to not to get has a fraud issue when they are offering their services. Depending on what they're offering, maybe, for example, sending a digital ware or a physical ware, or wiring money, this can be quite a severe thing. So I think most companies, at least not tech companies, most non-tech companies, digital identification is important because you want to not to have any fraud going on, because this is your incentive as a verifier, basically. But then there is the tech companies, right, like Google and Facebook and to a certain extent also Apple, who have tons of identity information. At that part it starts to get a bit complicated as well to give a answer to it. But I would even say that it's kind of turns into a privatized intelligence agency in certain cases, right? So it can be either monetized digital identity data, like in case of, for example, Facebook, because what is identity, right? Like it's basically bits and pieces of information about yourself, and likes and dislikes are actually also a part of your identity, or the website that you visit tells about what your preferences are about certain things. And this way it's being monetized right now for advertisement, which is also an important way of the best and the biggest way of monetizing right now at this point in the digital area, at least.
I think that the whole idea of identity is complicated, and I'm curious to see how things are going to evolve, where I think in the current state with digital ID programs that are pursuing self-sovereign identity, there's a lot of I guess there's a lot of questions still of how like certain of the infrastructure, like wallets, for example, is going to keep evolving. That's where the identity conversation comes in here too, because, and you had one use case in particular you mentioned before, the smart checkout where you have receipts. So it'll be interesting to see if I think this is a big question a lot of people have, is just what's going to play out in the wallet space, right? Like, are there going to be a lot of different wallets where I have this one that I store my receipts in here, I have this one for my government ID, or are people just going to use one wallet basically that aggregates everything and then connects to different networks with maybe common functions?
I think that's what it should be. Like, it's again a personal opinion, but I don't see the point of having a wallet for receipts, having a wallet for your high level of assurance credentials, having another. It would, I mean, the whole user experience would turn sour again, right? Because I don't know, when you're using your cell phone, for example, then when you click on the link on the DITCOM invitation, for example, you have to choose with which wallet you want to answer, which is, I mean, if you have 5 wallets, it turns into a bad user experience, in my opinion.
We started talking about governance a little bit, I think. So we've covered some use cases. It's been great to hear kind of what's going on. We have spoken in the past about some, because if we look at the use cases as being vertical, there's maybe some horizontal kind of services or horizontal work that's going on. And I think governance is one of them. Cybersecurity would be another one. You just mentioned user experience. So within the IDunion consortium, that is just kind of running on the same network, like so I think this is quite valuable information for people that are looking to learn from IDunion, is what are kind of some of these horizontal services or packages that run across the different use cases, where the use cases could kind of share some of these things.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, as I mentioned at the beginning as well, we're building a decentralized identity network governed by basically the stakeholders and node operators being the partners of IDunion consortium, meaning we need a governance system to take new partners, create endorser roles, for example, to be able to write on the ledgers to new customers or different partners that want to participate in IDunion network, as well as votings and basically creating a governance for this identity network. And for that reason, we are working on creating a European social community. It's called SCE. Is a governance form for European Union companies or corporations out within the European Union, to have a legal framework that is binding to every single state, basically, European state. This is one work stream, for example, that is being worked on. The other one is, of course, being the creation or working on the technical network, meaning we have right now a test network for IDunion with 17 or now 18 nodes running in a decentralized environment. And we are working on seeing what the flows might be, what needs to be changed, as well as work on having a proper plan for the production network, so to speak. So when things go live, real use cases with real amount of scale can be sustained by the network, so to speak. Another one that that is also relevant to every single use case is the cybersecurity topic. And in this area, we take a look at different aspects of SSI stack itself, including, for example, wallet. Wallet security is one of the more important work streams that we have because we're going to save digital identification, official identification. It needs to have like certain level of assurance according to the German Information Security Agency. But as well as there are some other topics like initial trust. How can we create the initial trust to a issuer, for example, or a verifier, as well as yeah, some other things like testing the network for scalability within the cybersecurity working stream. Let me check. And also use of biometric information, for example, to have additional security when using a wallet, for example, or when getting verifiable credentials. And another working stream that is also equally important, if not more, is the user acceptance and user experience work stream, where we are trying to figure out or just right now create the user stories and create a user journey for whenever the user is going to use their wallet, may it be for getting the basic ID to getting their digital driver's license or their student IDs or KYC data. This has been evaluated by partners who have experience in design of tech design, so to speak. And I think the final work stream actually two more. One of them is interoperability. This is the work stream that we are leading as Technical University of Berlin. And in that area, we are looking at how we can create an interoperable environment for other SSI ecosystems outside Hyperledger Indy, for example, because this is only one stack, as you know, and there are many other stacks that are used in the SSI community. And we are taking a look at the layers of interoperability, like public trust layers or credential layer or agent layer, application layer, and creating a plan to actually have a dual technology stack to support both Indy solutions, so to speak, but also other solutions using, for example, Hyperledger Aries, using Aries Interoperability Profile 2.0, plus some more as well, like OpenID Connect, for example, to bind OpenID Connect as well. And the final work stream is research and software development, so to speak. And in that area, we are looking at the current stack, basically, and seeing what else needs to be done to contribute to the open source development, software development, to improve the Hyperledger stack if necessary to the points that we mentioned in the interoperability part, right, with the dual tech stack. So those would be the work streams that are relevant for every single use case. And all of these use case clusters, basically, domains are benefiting from these areas.
If we talk about just wallets for a minute, again, going back to wallets, crucial piece here. Who handles kind of the certification wallet or doing an audit or giving a certification about wallet security? Is this something that is handled by, a process within the IDunion consortium? How does that look like?
So right now there is nothing, right? So because nothing is really official running so far, we are all in the conceptualizing phase and alpha stage, I would say, in the product maturity. And right now there is no certification. However, in the future, it is planned that the German Information Security Agency a certification is going to be needed to store certain credentials which needs a high level of assurance, so to speak, right? To make sure, for example, the example of basic ID. In order to store the basic ID, the wallet will need to be have certain level of certification and safety measures, so to speak. But this is still something that, I think some colleagues from working from Bundesdrucker would be a better people to ask this question to. But as far as I know, this hasn't been so far created. This process doesn't exist yet. Understood. This is also a question that is going to be very important for the European wallet as well. I mean, I'm not sure if you heard about it too, but Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, has actually made a statement back a couple of months ago that there will be like a European e-identity, and she was also talking about wallet solution, for European wallet solution for electronic identities. Without saying, of course, the technology itself, it was actually referring to self-sovereign identity. But then comes the question as well, who's going to be certifying these? What kind of competition model is going to be there? Are they going to choose one wallet and say this is a EU wallet, or is every European Union country can have their own competition regulations, so to speak, and have a kind of a free market competition environment to see which wallet wins, basically, so to speak. But these are all still open questions that are, being addressed.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, because then when you start looking at wallet certifications and ensuring that you mentioned the AIP 2.0, that you're compliant with that you're maybe compliant with some OpenID Connect stuff, then you get into the whole question of we're trying to use as much open source code as possible, but at some point there is intellectual property that is built on top of this code to facilitate the use cases, the user experiences, and it really comes down to the UX at that point, where you start seeing some IP getting created. And so is that the whole question about IP here? And I know that IDunion has different technology solution providers that are providing wallet solutions. Is the whole topic of IP an important one, or an important discussion that's happening now too?
Well, I'm working at a university. So for me, the more open source and kind of free licenses, the better it is. However, of course, companies need to earn money and have to monetize their labor and solutions, so to speak. And in that area, most of the identity holder wallets are at this point proprietary code. Actually, along with the issuer agents, so they're all based on the open source frameworks, Hyperledger Aries. Different holder wallets, identity holder wallets are based on .NET framework, and most of our issuer agents and verifier agents are based on the Python framework, ACAPI. However, they are all proprietary at the time, and they're trying to offer a great UI or UX work on like different areas of use cases. For example, Lisi is more going for the area of banking, of course, because of their background, right? We as Technical University of Berlin, we are using Lisi for issuance and verifying credentials. Agents, for example, whereas Esatus is more in the area of authentication authorization. So they're building more like a identity access management solution to different parties, basically. So this is my personal opinion. Again, I cannot speak for these suppliers, of course, but I would hope that at least identity holder wallets are going to be open source, because it should be open source, in my opinion, because we are using decentralized identity. It should be, so it's based on, it's created on the premises of open source. And then the name of decentralization, I think, is very important, that people know what they're using to keep their sensitive data, right?
So what does the next year look like for IDunion? I think we're at a stage where there's been the completion of a lot of pilots, and there's various use cases that are being run. What does, I guess, the day we're recording this is October 1st, 2021. We've entered the last few months of the year. What does the rest of the year look like, and what does 2022 look like?
So I would say the rest of the year is that we have a couple of milestones about creating the European Cooperative Society. And I think that is going to be following through the Q1 2022. And around end of Q1 2022, beginning of Q2 2022, we are planning to create that SCE organization and start with our productive network following that. And I think that's going to be a bigger milestone because of the fact that we are already building these use cases, and some of them have been already started to be deployed. And once we have the productive network, we are going to start to see the scales of things. And I think that's going to be very interesting as well as challenging for all of us who are working on the project, as well as users that will be deploying these tools and credentials, the new type of credentials. Besides that, we have a bit of a tech stack kind of moving on area that seems to be interesting, like supporting different kind of technology stacks like BBS Plus signatures or JSON-LD credentials. I am very much looking forward to that part as the person who's working on the interoperability of these solutions. As well as we are also looking forward to have the IDaaS toolbox, which is going to be about the requirements from a digital identity, electronic identity in European Union environment, so to speak, and start building our digital identities, including basic ID or wallets.
Thanks for tuning in today. Hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. To stay up to speed with future episodes, or to catch up on ones you may have missed, make sure to check out the SSI Orbit podcast on your favorite podcast platform, and make sure you subscribe. If you have any questions, comments, or wish to see someone in particular on a future episode, you can find me by searching Mathieu Glaude on LinkedIn or Twitter. Feel free to reach out to me directly and I'll get back to you. See you all next time.